China has the biggest population in the world, 1.4 billion people. But that's about to change, and by a lot, and the world will change with it. China's just announced its population last year fell for the first time in 62 years. That's since the Great Famine caused by the lunatic communist policies of dictator Mao Zedong. It wasn't famine this time that's caused the drop, and not really the extra COVID deaths either. China lost 850,000 people because a lot of young Chinese don't want or can't afford children. And the population will keep dropping for a long time for the same reasons, so that India will very soon have the most people in the world. Now, here's the thing for us. People are saying, well, look, this is a crisis. China's going to run out of young people to pay for all the older people, and the Communist Party is panicking. It's now scrapped its one-child policy, is asking people to have more children. But think, if even China, with 1.4 billion people, says, sorry, that's not enough, we must keep going for the economy, that tells us there's a problem with this idea that more people is always better. Because when does that game end? You look at Australia. We are not losing people. We are adding them now in record numbers. In fact, the government this week said we're going to add 300,000 people this financial year just from immigration. And that's not even counting all the new babies. And we're told we have to keep adding all these people to get more workers and to get richer because more is better. But really, this is now starting to sound like a giant Ponzi scheme. Joining me is Leith van Onselen, an economist who's worked for the Australian Treasury and Goldman Sachs and is co-founder of MacroBusiness. Leith van Onselen, it's great to catch up with you after a while. Now, first, China losing people. It's going to lose a lot more year by year. How do you think that's going to change China and the world?
Yeah, well, certainly this has been an issue that's decades in the making. It really goes back to the one-child policy in the 1970s. So effectively what that did is that gave China a optimal demographic model, optimal demographic structure for several decades, because it had a load of people in working age not supporting many young people and not supporting many old people. The problem is 3 decades or so later, China's working age population has suddenly become an elderly population, and it's now left with a small number of young people supporting a huge number of old people, and now deaths are outnumbering births, which means that China's population is falling, and it's going to fall for decades to come. So, you know, as you quite rightly said in the intro, India is now going to become the biggest population. China's is going to continue to shrink for decades. And what this means for Australia is China is our biggest export market. And effectively, fewer people means fewer houses demanded. It means less infrastructure. And that therefore means less demand for Australia's iron ore and coking coal, for example. So it also has impacts on Australia going forward in that our key export markets are going to shrink over the longer term. Although you won't feel it on, necessarily this year, next year, or the year after, but over, say, a 10-year period or a 20-year period, their demand for iron ore and coking coal, which are 2 of our key exports, is going to shrink quite considerably.
But Leith, now what about us? We're going the other way. 300,000 more immigrants just this year on top of the babies that will be born. That's more than the government actually predicted. How many of its predictions are turning, terrible? This growth rate seems insane.
Yeah, that's right. Look, if anything, I think this 300,000 is wildly understated. Based on the massive surge in international students and temporary migrants that we've already seen, I'm tipping probably 400,000 this year. Now, just to put that into perspective, wow. Australia has never seen net overseas migration above 315,000 in 2009 under Big Australia, Kevin Rudd. We all remember that one, how that went. And this year under Big Australia, Anthony Albanese, or Bigger Australia, Anthony Albanese, we're going to smash that record easily. And basically, we've had this snow job where the Albanese government has handpicked the Jobs and Skills Summit participants who all favour big Australia immigration to get this fake consensus for big Australia immigration. And now we've got this fake immigration review, which is going to do more of the same. At the same time, we have all the business lobbies, the property lobbies, the education industry all pushing for big Australia. Meanwhile, what I ask is, we just had the election in last year, not about 6 months ago. Where was the discussion on immigration then? Why wasn't this put to the Australian people? Because every single opinion poll, you go to any mainstream media article on this issue, and the overwhelming majority of Australians are against big Australia immigration, yet it's been shoved down our throats against our will.
You're bringing 300 to 400,000 more immigrants in a single year. What's that going to do to property prices? What's it going to do to roads? What's it going to do to hospitals? What's it going to do to public transport? And what's it going to do to jobs? We're just celebrating that so many Australians now, unemployment rate has been so low, bring in 300 or 400,000 more immigrants to compete for those jobs. Guess what? But we seem, Leith, to be addicted to an economic model where we always need more people. In fact, we're now importing a servant class, basically, people who wipe the bottoms of the age, because Australians won't do that, and be cooks and chefs and waiters and all that kind of thing. But how many more people must we import before we finally say enough, given that even 1.4 billion people in China isn't enough for them?
Look, it's never going to be enough for them. The intergenerational report or the latest population statement says we're going to go to 50 million and above. If it's not going to stop, because unfortunately, immigration does not solve the so-called population aging problem, because migrants themselves grow old. And all it means is that you've got to continually import more people every single year to cover those who you imported, in our case, the post-war period, who are now getting old. It's basically Ponzi economics that doesn't work. And it's coming to you at a time when Australia's rental market is the tightest on record, and rents are growing at double-digit rates, which is also the highest on record. And I just ask, where are all these hundreds of thousands of people going to live? Are they going to live in tents, in cars, on the street? It's really an inequality disaster in the making. And you can put that across hospitals, schools, roads, any manner of social and economic infrastructure is going to get even more stress. It already is under stress before we've done this, and has been under stress for decades. And yet the government under Treasury, backed by the big business lobby, the property lobby, the education industry, are all for big Australia because they privatise the gains. But obviously the costs are socialised on everyone else through lower livability, having to pay for toll roads, all this other stuff. And also how's Australia going to meet its emissions reductions targets? It's not. It can't.
Well, oh my goodness, there's one for you right there. Plus, of course, a lot of the poor are now living in far-flung suburbs, outer suburbs of cities, disconnected from everyone else. It is just, it just drives me nuts.